We're going to start with our first panel of the day. We have a list of superstars coming in for this one. Know your customers, how to stay on top of customer needs. We have Tomer Sharon, Nikki Anderson, Marcus Castefanos, and Andre Albuquerque. Akosh is going to moderate the event. He's going to introduce them. It's going to be a powerful discussion. Tune in.
The first topic is that there's a lot of talk about knowing what your users want and uncovering their preferences. But it's also vast. Like, there are so many things that a product team could research. And I was just thinking, like, what your thoughts are. What is it that they must research and must know about their customers? And the first question I'd like to pass to Nikki.
Cool, thanks. Hey, this is actually a really great question, and I'm very happy you passed it over to me. So something that is very important for me is high impact research. So making sure that you are doing research that is the most impactful that you can do for your team and for your organization, because I know that also means, like, we have limited customers, limited number of participants that we can sometimes reach out to, and we want to make sure that we're reaching out to them for the most important research, especially when it is that limited customer base. So what I like to do with my product teams is to sit down and do like a question gathering workshop that really highlights the big questions that we have as an organization, or the super big gaps in our knowledge. So where is the assumption that we have, and like, where is that gap where we're just like, we really don't know what the answer to this is, or we're really leaning too heavily on assumptions to create something in particular. So I really like to do that question gathering. And then I also ask, where are we really stuck? Where do we need information in order to make decisions and move forward? So it's kind of how I think about it, is really looking across different teams to bring together those questions, and then finding the questions that overlap multiple teams, because those would be the highest impact kind of questions to answer.
Amazing. Any of you guys want to build on that?
Sure. I'll first say, thank you for having me. I'll say that I agree 100% with Nikki. I'll just add, your job as a researcher is to kind of be in the lookout for these questions. So it could be a workshop. It could be kind of just sharpening your eyes and ears for all kinds of meetings and gatherings. Look for questions. Sometimes it's going to be easy. People just ask questions out loud. But in many cases, it's not going to be that easy. Sometimes it's maybe a conflict between two people or two teams, and there's a question coming out of that, and then research can help with that. Maybe it's a big dilemma a team or teams have, and so on. So constantly kind of opening your ears mostly for these questions.
I can jump in to add a little bit of another angle to it. I mean, the key thing in product development is to maximize value and minimize risk. So minimizing risk is to build the wrong thing, right? So that is really important to kind of. Nikki, you talked about a brainstorming session relating to questions that we have as a team. That's excellent, right? But maybe we could have a brainstorming session. What could go wrong in terms of the product that we intend to build, right? So that is a tactic or technique that I typically recommend to teams as well.
Yeah, there's a game, isn't there? There's a workshop game where you can do that, all the things that could go wrong with this particular idea. And I think it's
a pre-mortem.
Yeah, it's super, super smart.
I just can you hear me well?
Yes.
Good? Yeah, I just wanted to add, like, a really common thing is also the perception of the risks beyond the pre-mortem, talking about, like, how are customers, people used to solving the problem we're trying to solve? Because often the way they're trying to solve the problem, it doesn't look like the way we're trying to solve their problem. Sometimes we're competing with stuff that's so completely different. It's like saying that VR competes with Netflix, and they're completely different mediums and setups and environments. And if you're just saying, oh, a VR company is trying to do research against customers of other VR companies, it's ignoring who you're actually competing. So I think that research should take into consideration, and often that consideration comes from both going out and talking with customers and seeing how they're engaging with the problem space, but also internally on how we believe the problem space should look like and how we can increase the range. I think including that within the discovery is something we'll be doing.
Cool. Thanks a lot, Andre. Since you can stay unmute, I have the next question for you. Like you're a product leader, VP product. You built a number of product teams, big organizations, and I was just wondering, like there's like product teams, they're constantly juggling, right, with their time, and they have to make calls, and chances are they don't have the manpower to research everything. So how should they approach this? On the one hand, let's stick with Nikki's example of identifying all these questions and hypotheses that needs to be researched, and when that meets the actual manpower and budget that the team has.
Yeah, so a couple of things here. Number one, I'm a big fan of creating product first teams. What that means is that you don't have siloed skills. You don't have software developers. You don't have product owners. You don't have researchers. You have product researchers, product engineers, product managers. That means they should be product first. And a big part of product is research, is asking the right questions, getting to enough answers, it's formulating great hypotheses. And a great way to overcome the lack of resources or people to tackle this is to actually equip everyone to be able to be a researcher first, to be a product person first, and to tackle their own problem space, whether that problem space is scoping or prioritizing or deciding on architecture or deciding on delivery. Like, you can be a researcher on your area, ask great questions, formulate great hypotheses, and go around what the solution space should actually look like. So I think when we implement this kind of setup, which is a mindset, right? Like I'm a big, I don't know what's the opposite of a fanboy, but like I hate the product owner role, PO, because I believe everyone in the product team should be a product owner. It means owning the product. It means owning the result and the effectiveness of the problem. Then you are whatever you are within the team of product. And I think research is a core part of product. And if everyone puts that hat of a researcher, you can very easily overcome the problem of lacking resources to run research.
Very good points, and I think Marcus, we both heard from Marty Kagan how he hates the role of product owners, and he also gave like a similar explanation for that. Do any of you have anything to reflect on that, maybe or a story to add?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to echo what Andre talked about, just to do research as a team, to just spread that intelligence in the team and to equip more people to do research. But I think, what's really important is that you also have to build deep skills to do research, right? There's an art to asking the right question. So it's also important that you have a person on the team who has that deep skill as well. So it's a kind of a trap that I've seen in some teams, that you just you rely on the entire team to do research.
I definitely echo the team sport. It shouldn't be done just by one person necessarily, or gated. That's the last thing that a team needs, is more silos. So I completely agree. As a user researcher, I obviously have seen and felt tough feelings with regards to democratization, and with teaching others user research. But I have found that there are people at organizations, whether it be product owners or devs or marketing or designers or whomever, and when they are super interested in honing those skills and really flexing those muscles, and it's not like, we do one research project and then they don't speak to users for another 6 months, so they forget all of the skills. I'm totally all for that. I will also say, like, not everything should be researched. Like, we don't need to research everything. There's a lot of other methodologies out there that are much better suited, especially than qualitative user research, to find answers to problems or questions. Because I've seen teams kind of get stuck being like, okay, like let's test this one very small thing, and I'm like, yeah, my sample size of 7 people for this particular usability test isn't going to give us what we need to feel confident for this decision. So yeah, I think it's also being very mindful of what you are researching and making sure that it makes sense to research it.
Can I add one more thing? I think you're talking about, you asked about juggling time and deciding what research to do. I think generally speaking, the key word there is impact. If you feel either yourself or getting hints from the team that the thing you're approaching towards kind of with research is not something you're going to do something about, then there's no point. That said, your team might think that a very minor usability test is the most important thing in the world to do now, while it's not necessarily that. And maybe they can do that on their own. I would, as a rule of thumb, my opinion, I would highly, highly prioritize more discovery research and generative research rather than tactical research. So if there's a problem with juggling time and deciding what to do research on, that's how I act, at least.
It's a very good point. And in one of the webinars I had, I think it was about mixed method research. My guest brought up Janet Fucella's name, who wrote an article on prioritizing user research. I don't know if you're acquainted with that, but she has this matrix where she looks at like problem clarity and risk, and then has 4 quadrants to decide what you need to design, or sorry, what you need to research, what you don't need to research, what you can like take as a risk. Do you have any thoughts? This is like every 2x2 matrix is a very simplified view of the world. But do you have like your 2 cents on this approach to prioritize?
I think it's a conversation between you, the researcher, and the team, or if there's no researcher, then conversation in the team. Yeah.
I'm a huge fan of frameworks and like templates and 2x2s, you know, but I feel as though sometimes what can happen is we can take stuff, at least this is what I did as a user researcher when I was starting. I started a teeny tiny startup that had never done research, that was B2B, and I tried to steal and copy and paste like IDEO's like design research process, and it just crashed and burned because it didn't work within the context of the organization. So I think that we can use these things as inspiration for us to bring to our teams and see what fits and what doesn't, rather than always trying to just take what is 100% there already. I think that these frameworks can serve as really, really great inspiration for starting the conversations, but will probably need to be tailored and personalized to the actual environment and context in which the people are working.
If I can pitch in, I think frameworks and processes, in the end of the day, they exist to create harmony in a chaotic environment. And I think people forget to assess whether there is indeed chaos or not. And sometimes they jump straight to a framework, straight to a template, straight to a way that others said this works. And sometimes you're not actually solving for any chaos. Sometimes you're just working on a blank canvas, fully unencumbered, fully autonomous, fully capable of thinking through some first principles, which I know it's an expression that is tingling, but like often sometimes people should use those frameworks and templates to kind of get an idea direction, but then they should assess how much should I actually use of this? How much harmony do I need to create? It's the same thing that I think Nikki said, like not everything needs to be researched. And I think one of the areas that rarely frameworks talk about is gut, it's conviction, right? Because it's not like you can't mathematically understand the level of conviction of gut. But sometimes when there's high conviction and there's an easy path to build something and ship something, and often a cheap path, there's nothing like putting something live in production in front of user and the customer and having them either take out their credit card or not, rather than saying, oh, I would use this, or ideally you don't ask future questions, you ask past questions. But there's nothing like live, there's nothing like production. And if you have a high conviction, cheap enough app to test like that, there's many of the things I think you said, like you don't need to research and you can act like this. Everything else, I mean, it's a balance, right? I think if there's chaos, framework away, process it away. Otherwise, like iterate on the velocity of the team to make decisions, to ship, to build, to test, and prove hypotheses. I think if you go that way, often you can get quite a big dose of balanced research within the process.
Yeah, I mean, the simplest framework is to just balance things, right? So you have your intuition of what to build, right, in your team. And then you have user research, and then you have looking at data, and then you're talking to stakeholders. So if you expose yourself to different data sources, you will have a more nuanced picture, and you will have a better gut feeling of what to build. So that is mixed methods in my head to kind of, exposing yourself to more data.
Cool, thank you. Tomer, you've been user research leader in a number of renowned companies. And I want to throw the next topic at you. And it's a bit ungrateful to get this, but it's nothing personal. But I think you're a good starting point for this. So a lot of times I hear when I talk about user research is the return on investment. How do you quantify the ROI of research? And I think there are like two hypotheses is that one, you can measure the cost, and then you can estimate the reward, because from the combination of the two, you can come up with an ROI. And I was just wondering in what context you encountered this sort of argument to justify user research through an ROI. And the second sub-question here, is this actually the right way to justify why we do research?
Sorry, I don't play that game. I don't need to justify myself to anyone. Last time I did anything related to justifying or checking or evaluating ROI of research was maybe 15 years ago. And I don't have any intention to do that. There are enough companies and organizations that understand it. I don't see anybody else justifying themselves on the team. So I don't think researchers should.
Do you mind if I reframe a bit the question? Because I do want your question on one thing. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So this is a situation that kind of happened to me. And I'm a startup guy. I'm like 0 to 1 most of my life. And often with CEOs on 0 to 1, velocity and ship it and let's build it and why waste time and why are we taking so long is a common denominator, right? And I'm a big fan of research, especially as you go from 0 to 1. The part of talking with customers is extremely, extremely important. Like if you build things in the comfort of your 4 walls, the likelihood is that you fail. So the question I have is like, how would you face a CEO that it's not like he or she's saying, I don't believe in research. What he or she's saying is, I know what we need to build. We just need to go fast because there's a pressure of funding or there's a pressure of getting this. It convinced me why we should go a bit slower to do the things that you believe are right. Let's put it like this. It's not justifying, it's convincing. I don't know if this makes it easier to...
Yeah. I mean, I don't believe anything is right. I mean, I think there's no right or wrong. I just don't feel I don't feel that this discipline should be in a position where it kind of needs to persuade anyone or justify anything. I think that I wouldn't even find myself, now that I'm kind of older and wiser, I hope. I don't choose to work in these companies where people ask me to be persuaded, because they don't need me to be persuaded. Their users will persuade them very harshly, very quickly. And eventually those companies, we've all been there. If they ignore research, suddenly one day they don't use the word research. They use these terms that I hate so much. Talking with customers, collecting feedback. This is not research. Because talking with customers sounds like anybody can do it. And then if you want to do something more, then you need to persuade. I don't need to persuade anyone. You don't know why your customers are signing up and then not using your product? I wonder. Maybe a meeting with 15 people on Latte will solve that. I don't need to persuade anyone about anything. Let's be positive. More and more companies understand it these days. Not enough, I agree, but more and more understand it. Unfortunately, in the past year, there was a lot of layoffs across companies. I don't have internal information about kind of whether this was an intentional decision to get rid of researchers, but not only researchers, but a lot of researchers were laid off. But I've seen very strange things in the past year where companies lay off tons of researchers, and then you begin to find research positions available in the same companies. I wonder why.
Nikki, do you have a take on this topic?
Yeah, I spent a lot of my career convincing and justifying, and I wish that I hadn't. But unfortunately, I was in positions where I felt as though there wasn't much of a choice. And I was often the first and only user researcher, right? And I was kind of like, well, why did you hire me? That was a bit of a question mark. That was a bit confusing. But oftentimes what I found is people will engage with me and they will say, oh, we have a problem, right? We have a problem, like people are dropping off, like our retention rate sucks, or, our conversion rate has gone down, or something's wrong, right? And then I will say, oh, let's understand it better, right? And then suddenly that's too slow. And I'm like, well, you have a problem. So I get a bit of whiplash sometimes with this kind of question. But ultimately, there's a lot of user researchers who are in positions in which they're having to justify their work day to day. It's an unfortunate situation. Hopefully it's going to go away. Hopefully it's going to get better. And more people are understanding the value of user research. But what I do try and say to them is if you're struggling with this particular problem, like try to make sure that you're getting in there with the most impactful the impactful research, so that you can, I try not to say prove the value of user research, but demonstrate the value of user research to your colleagues by making sure that you are getting in there and doing the most impactful stuff that you can be doing. But I must admit, as somebody who for about 8 years hit my head against the justification wall, it hurt quite a lot. So I echo lots of sentiments.
I can add one story that I've used in the past. It's the $300 million button. Have you heard that story? It's an old story, but a good story. It's from Jared Spool, who did research for, I think, Macy's, one of the e-commerce sites in the US. And what they discovered was a massive usability issue. So people didn't want to create an account, like a username, a password, that kind of stuff. They just wanted to check out as guests. So that was a key insight from the research. And then they did some changes to the checkout flow. So you could check out as a guest. And then they saw revenue of $300 million because of that. So conversion rate went up, right? So that story could be good for stakeholders. Like $300 million, it's pretty good. And that was in 1 year, I think, or something crazy like that. So if you Google the $300 million button, then you have that story.
That's a good story. And Marcus, let's stick with you. I am going to throw in a last question for this round, and then we'll take some questions from the audience as well. Make sure we have a conversation here. And I'd like to focus a little bit on the continuous aspect of research. And just in general, give us your thoughts why you think it's important to stay on top of user needs all the time. And And the question in brackets is how often do actually user needs change that necessitates to stay on top of them?
So let's tackle the first aspect. So continuous. I mean, this is a muscle that you need to build. And I can tell you a story. So I worked for a financial institution. I was head of design for quite a few years, and then built up a design team. And we had 2 user researchers. And what we did was we got this continuous muscle to work. So we set up user Fridays. So every 2 weeks we had users coming in, and we did evaluative research and also generative research. So we didn't have a set agenda. So we tested prototypes that were created by the design team at the time, or we wanted to hone in on specific problems or needs relating to users. So that is a recommendation, to just have that in the calendar. So every 2 weeks you have 3 interviews for, I don't know, 45 minutes, and then you have that muscle going. Right. And then you could ask a question by the end of the interview. Okay, so could you recommend a person we could talk to as well? So you start to build out a panel of customers to interview. So that's a technique as well. And then regarding your question about needs changing. So so that is a philosophical question. What do you define as a need, right? And there are some basic human needs, right? And then you could
I just
Yeah.
wanted to be a bit provocative.
Yeah.
Not continuous research, but I'm interested in how you're thinking about why the values of continuous research.
I mean, absolutely, 100%. I mean, you need to have this muscle going, working all the time, and then to gather insights and to work both with evaluative and generative research. So I can end there. And then other smart people can jump in with their thoughts.
So I'm happy to pitch in here. I think on the continuous side, on the need change, I don't think people often realize that, like, the concept of product market fit, or the way I try to kind of consider market, is some people with a problem times the willingness to pay to solve that problem. You might have a problem that if you are not willing to pay, it's a worthless market, right? But the thing is, the willingness changes over time. What was delightful and generated a lot of willingness to pay suddenly becomes expected or commoditized, and suddenly that sole thing is no longer driving willingness to pay. So suddenly you might continue having the problem, but what you're offering is no longer triggering that willingness to pay. So the continuous discovery of, like, okay, what is the next thing that can sustain that willingness to pay to be as high as it was, so that I can keep converting, I can keep growing, I can keep satisfaction, I can keep retention. So I'd say, like, if I had to explain from a point of, like, this is why that continuous discovery matters. This is why every team needs to continuously do this. This is why we shouldn't, like, expect the glory time when we crack something, or when we nail the niche. Is this, like, you're commoditizing your success? Commoditizes the reason why you were successful. So this is kind of how I try to see it from a product standpoint.
I just want to add something about needs. Needs don't change much. On one hand. On the other hand, our interests as a team change all the time, and that's okay. But I'm trying to think of an example. Maybe if you study the needs of salespeople, whatever. I'm not being very specific here.
To make money.
Yeah, but their needs in trying to do that. But what they need. If you do that research study today, and you get answers to that question, you don't need to do that a year from now, or 2 years from now, or 3 years from now, or 4 years from now. It's not going to change much, if at all. So the important thing is to first expose and understand those needs, and understand how, the difference between what we're interested in and what users really need. That said, in terms of continuous research, if you do continuous research, and I would argue continuous research should happen every day, then you can have your, let's say, permanent questions that you ask, but then based on the interests of the team you can add to that. So let's say you always ask the same 3 questions, whatever, and suddenly the team is interested in something in a 4th question, in an answer to a 4th question. Add that for 2 weeks, and you collect enough information to get an answer to that and move on to the next thing the team is interested in. But again, generally speaking, needs don't change much. Doesn't mean that you're done once you do the research, but because there are always other domains that you might not have investigated.
Thank you. And Nikki, that leaves you with the final words.
I'll try and be concise and intelligent sounding. So while I agree with continuous research and I'm all for it, please just make sure that you have goals for the research, and please just make sure that it doesn't become casual chats with customers that then don't end with anything like synthesis or no note taking or no recording. So if you're going to do continuous research, like, to put the rigor in the continuous research, because it can get easy to kind of let that go if you're doing it so often. So if you're going to do it, put the rigor in, put the goals in, put the intention for the research in, and then hopefully you're golden.
Thanks a lot. Thanks to all of you. Really insightful, and I love the stories that you shared. I think the stories are always great, and they are easily remembered. And I asked Multi to join us and throw a few questions in your direction from the audience.
Yeah, thank you, Akash. Brilliant conversation. I'll tell you, the Q&A, I don't know if all the panelists had a chance to look at the Q&A. It's gushing. So a lot of comments are coming in. I want to take us back for a second to Tomer, what you said, that you don't have to justify to anyone, right? I mean, and like Nikki said, well, you hired me for a reason, let me do my job. But the reality is, from some of the comments we're getting here, is that researchers do need to come in and justify their work. They need budgets, just like marketing as an initiative that came up, and they're coming in and say, okay, I want this money to do so-and-so right now. The question is, while they're educating their teams to get more resources, to do more things, how can they justify it using ROI? How can they come in? What are your best tips on do that, and you're most likely to convert on your internal negotiation efforts?
I just refuse to play that game. Sorry.
So for the others who would like to,
the work should, stand for itself. Of course, you should, explain your work and kind of help everybody understand what you found and why it's important, what they should do about it. But not playing a game of prove it to me.
Okay. Anyone else?
I mean, I can bring up an article that could be helpful. There's an article by Rich Mironov. It's called ROI of Discovery. And it talks about, he shares his insights of working with many clients, and he has, I think he has worked in 30 years in Silicon Valley relating to discovery. And then talks about, product waste. So building the wrong thing, and what's the success rate of building the wrong thing. And what he's seen is that 35 to 70% is the percentage of product waste in the ideas that we have, right? And then Microsoft, I think they state that it's 66% of their product ideas that fail. In terms of Bing, 85% of A/B tests fail. So there's statistics to show that, if you don't do research, if you don't do discovery, you're going to be unlucky. So it's about increasing your luck in building the right thing for your customers and end users. So Google that article. That could be helpful.
Got it. Another good question that came in and said, okay, we got all the information, we did the research. What are some of the powerful ways that you know of to present that research to the stakeholders within the company? Many of them are not research oriented. They need to process a lot of data quickly. How do you present your research in a compelling way?
Maybe I can pitch in here. I'd say, like, everyone gets convinced by a great story. And everyone's focused on their own incentives. And I think most people forget that. If I'm the salesperson, I'm the marketing person, I have my KPIs. I know what will lead to my next promotion. I know what will lead to my own success. I know what will lead to my department getting more budget. If you choose to present something, to communicate something from your angles, from your incentive, the likelihood that one, I don't get engaged because it's just not a great story, and two, I don't make the bridge to my own incentive is much higher than if you read the room, if you adjust the story, if you make it compelling, if you align it towards ideally a common mission or at least a common enemy. And if you understand the incentives on the other side and how, whether it's my research or whether it's the vertical or area that I'm trying to provide insights on, help you achieve your own goal, which in the end of the day is just a sub-part or sub-metric or an indicator of the overarching goal. So I think this helps if you adjust it that way. Often, like, you see a lot of people not caring enough about that, and that leads to a result of like, yeah, why does this matter to me? And people disengage.
Interesting. Very interesting. And I know we spoke about, oh, sorry, go ahead, Tomer.
Can I
Yeah.
add to that? I think that the most important thing, and I've seen a lot of researchers get a little bit confused about that. You make a lot of effort in the beginning. We talked about it earlier, to understand what are your team's questions, what are their knowledge gaps. And then suddenly, happens to a lot of researchers, when you come to present or report or whatever way you choose to do that, these questions are gone and you're talking about everything that you found. Very nice, very interesting, but your team and you agreed on questions you're going to answer. The research is going to be successful not because everybody likes the product. The research is going to be successful because you answered the questions you agreed on with the team. So whatever way you choose to do that, answer the damn questions that you agreed on with the team. That's what they're interested in. And if you don't do that, you leave them confused. And then talk about trust and persuasion and blah, blah, blah. Answer the questions.
Got it. Nikki, I see you nodding passionately. I assume you agree with that.
Yeah, my reports are literally like, this is the question you had. Here's the supporting research. This is the other question you had. Here's the supporting research. Like, we take, I don't know what it is. Maybe because we have in our mind that like PowerPoints or slides or presentations need to be like this fancy, pretty thing. And I see so many people be like, oh my goodness, what is it meant to look like? What am I meant to do? And I'm like, the entire point of research is like to support your teams with those questions that they had. And hopefully the problem that you could run into is if you didn't do all that planning with your team, right? Then you don't know what to put in your report. And if that's the case, well, probably shouldn't be doing the research. But I always say, like, stop mind reading. If you are so super confused, stop mind reading, ask what is most important to them. And just, you know, I as a recovering perfectionist, it really hurt me to admit that I didn't know what I was doing sometimes, and I wasn't sure what I should be putting in a report. But I sat down and I said, okay, just ask the question, and then I reported on that. And lo and behold, people were happy.
And isn't it pretty much the definition of A/B testing? I mean, the reason you're doing A/B testing is because sometimes you don't know, right? That's the purpose of A/B testing, is to experiment with things you don't know. Last question a couple more questions before we move into the next session. Some of the audience members asked, how do you define or how do you go about the roadmap? You know, you have a challenge that was presented to you by either the product team, leadership, whatever it may be. How do you start building the roadmap for your research? What are the first steps we should think about? Big one, right?
I can talk about roadmaps in general, but yeah.
Let's do it.
Okay. I mean, I think the key point is alignment, right? Alignment that your research is creating value for the team, that's creating value for the product organization, that's creating value for the company, that there's a clear lineage between your research and the greater good of the product team and the company, right? So you probably need to be proactive in terms of your research, right? To understand what's coming in terms of OKR planning or other types of activities relating to product strategy and so on. So you need to be in tuned what's going on. You can't work in a bubble or a silo as a researcher. You need to understand where you can add value in terms of questions to answer or risks to mitigate or whatever term you have, right? So that will be my answer.
Got it. Anyone else before we are summarizing this session today?
The one thing I can say is like I try not to silo roadmaps between teams. That's a great way of just saying you're by yourself because you have your own roadmap. You care about your roadmap. Like there's a reason it's called product roadmap. It's because it's our plan as one team together to tackle a product, aka solve a problem. So I'd rather look at what's your contribution within your area for the overall product roadmap than saying you have your own research roadmap. Because by doing that, you're also removing the empowerment of people saying, I'm going to design my own process of thinking how I tackle, in this case, research within the overarching roadmap, rather than saying, oh, I need to build a roadmap. Sometimes for research, the roadmap is not a solution. That's not the actual best way, because roadmaps focus on predictability. And often research isn't predictable. Maybe the method is going to be predictable, but the results and the way you adjust your answer to those results isn't. So a roadmap might not even be the best answer for the research team.
Interesting view. Cool. This has been fascinating. Nikki, Andre, Marcus, Tomer, thank you so much for taking the time to share your insights today. Again, just by the flow of questions, I can tell that the audience was super tuned into what you have to say. Pleasure having you here. Thank you so much.